Share that.
All right,
How's
so
that look? Okay,
good.
awesome. Good stuff. Alrighty, let me just move some Zoom windows around. I'm not sure if you can see yourselves, but I just moved something in there. Cool. All right. Hello. I'm Mike Rogers, and I'm going to be talking to you about seeds today in Rails. And I'm really passionate about seeds. I kind of feel they're one of those things where if you get them right, they make projects like massively better. And in most projects, they're also not that great. So yeah, so a good seeds can help a app grow really nicely. So, oops, go to the next slide. Cool. Just a quick heads up. All the slides are going to be, which I'm going to be showing you, and all the code samples are available on like GitHub and on this domain. And you can take them. They're all MIT. If you like this talk and want to do it at another meetup, or you want to change something or anything like that, just go for it. You don't even have to ask me. Like I'm really just would rather get like the good vibes out there than anything else. Cool. So, what are we gonna like talk about? So, the idea of this talk is I'm gonna get you excited about making good seeds in your project, give you some strategies to like build them, and also give you reasons to like really want to do them because it is, yeah, they make me very happy. I like good seeds, so and I kind of want to have every Rails project to have good seeds. So, you're gonna hear me say seeds an awful lot in this project, in this talk today, by the way. So, see how many times I mispronounce it while I'm there. Cool. So first up, what are seeds? So in a traditional app, you may think, okay, they're just little rows in the database which we put in there, whether it's like little like maybe a user so we can log into an admin panel or a tax rate which is in the database, but they can be anything. They don't have to be data in the database. It can be like something from a YAML or like a model which just persists some data, but just something to make development nicer or our production environment just easier to work with. So some data is there. So yeah. And in Rails, it's always been really good. Like this, like Rails DBC command has always made me really happy. And I think the idea of like if you have really good seeds, you should be able to run this command like repetitively and constantly trash your environment, and it should just work, which is good. And I'm not sure if anyone knows about bin setup in Rails. If you ever look at that file, it is like my favorite thing where it runs yarn, it runs bundle, it resets the database, it does everything. And like I've got mine set up to like reseed the database, and it's 10 out of 10. It makes me so happy just to be able to change my branch and just suddenly trash everything and bring it all back up again, and then not have to worry about like the schema RB, like picking up some random changes or something like this. So yeah, in Rails, they live in this file in db/seeds. And most of the time, they look like this. This is like what people will see, and it's I hate this file with a passion. The default, whoever wrote this file, like I feel like it was written 10 years ago and never changed. And there's so many problems with this example. Mostly because I'm not really a Star Wars fan. I'm more of a Star Trek fan, so go figure. But also that you can't rerun this file like comfortably lots of times from this example. If you'd get like a bit more lucky in a Rails project, you might pick up something like this, where someone's maybe gone in and said, "Okay, in the development environment, let's create an admin account with this password," which is um, which is good. But you might get the other side of this, where you will get something like this, where okay, so I pulled this from an actual project I worked on a little while ago, where it had this nice comment saying, "By the way, don't run this thing in production and be really careful. And danger, dragons lives here." And yeah, it scares the heck out of me. The idea that someone's written this, I can't run it, it lives there, and it's just kind of sitting there waiting to break something for me. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. And okay, cool. Horror stories. All right, so I've got some horror stories for you as well, where I've had some like bad things happen in my development career, and I want to kind of share them where I think seeds or good seeds could have like saved the day. So a couple of years ago, my friend was like freelancing away. He got given a production database, put it on his laptop, and then he looked it in his office, went away for the weekend, came back. Someone had stolen the door off his office door and then stolen everything inside. So really scary. But on his laptop was this database with all of the users' emails. Like nothing was encrypted, nothing had been anonymized, like literally worst thing could ever first thing which could it was the worst thing which could have ever happened, but it was like really the thing which rubbed salt in the wound was they had to call up the customer and say, by the way, we haven't just lost your code, we've also lost all your customer details out of nowhere. And I always kind of thought, okay, well, there's definitely techniques there to mitigate against this, like a physical attack against your stuff. But like a simple thing, like had they not been storing like customers' emails and loads of other things on this developer's machine, it would have been just better. I heard Facebook actually stores or like makes their developers work on little clouds machines where they have to like SSH in, kind of like GitHub code spaces. I think that's kind of a quite cool idea. We might that could be the future of development in some respects. Um, all right, another time something went horribly wrong for me as a developer. I had a staging environment about 10 years ago where it had cron jobs running in the background, and it was a huge product. The customer we were working with, they really liked to test stuff in staging against real data. And for a while, we had it so it didn't send emails. And then one day, the customer was like, actually, can I have all the emails go to me? So we just kind of put in production and changed all the emails to go to this guy's account. And then one day they pulled in production again and didn't change the emails. And then the cron jobs kicked off at 6 in the morning, and it emailed something like 10,000 customers. And it was the most stressful day I've ever had. And I think I was a junior developer at the time. So I was very, very like ingrained about like, if the worst thing you can do is email a customer with some wrong information. Um, and finally, like the thing which really kind of like is my passion, it's this giving developers a better experience. Like the amount of projects I've worked on where I open it up and it's just a blank page after blank page, and I have to fill it in myself. And it makes me go, oh, why would I want to work on this project? I can't even figure out what it does because no one's bothered to put in any sample data. And it always makes me think that like, if you have really good seeds, you can make it easier to onboard a new developer. You can make it really obvious what your product does. You can even make it like a safe place to like play around and be like, hey, look, here's what this thing does. Here's how you break it. Here's when you click a button, it does something else. And like also you can have a lot of fun. You can make it so every item in the database is going to have at least 1,000 rows. So you're gonna have to have things like pagination and other things kicking in. So if a developer does an n+1, they will just know about it. So we can use seeds to make our development experience even better. All right, so I want to quickly check the vibe of the room. So do you know how to do the reactions in Zoom where you go down into the bottom corner down here and throw up some emojis? Awesome. All right. Who's worked on a project which has had no seeds at all and just completely blank? Okay, cool. So a good few of us. Cool. Um, who has worked on a project where they were given a production dump and just told to run with it? Okay, it's a few of us still. And lastly, who's worked on a project where they felt the seeds were really well maintained, like 10 out of 10, the perfect thing? Okay, a few of us, but not as many. Okay, generally, like the amount of thumbs goes down as I ask these questions, and it's like, okay, good stuff. This is what I like to see. It means this talk should be good. So let me give you some approaches to seeding, which I think should make everything much better and give you some good stuff. So this is the 5 main approaches I've found have been really effective for me. And let's jump into that. So the first one is just explicitly define seeds. Like we're not going for perfection here. This is just like a small project where we just need something. Maybe we break it into multiple files to make it easy. If you have this to start with, I think this is really good. This is going to at least get you on the right path of what you need to do. But you can kind of sprinkle a bit of awesomeness in here. You can use the faker gem, which I'm sure we've all like played with, where it kind of gives you some fake data, which every time you call it changes. So you can level up this seed by saying, okay, let's whenever we run this, let's create a user, let's give it 100 posts using Faker to randomize some data. And then let's also use an environmental variable to control when we run this. So if we want to have it so maybe this isn't going to run in production, but in a preview environment, this will kick in. So maybe, I'm not sure if anyone has used Heroku preview environments where you can trigger off like seeding and stuff, and you go something like this, so that whenever you like open it up on that pull request, it's full of data. That's chef's kiss. That's phenomenal. That's great. That makes me really happy. You can also use your fixtures as well. So this is something I was playing with where maybe seeds are a bit more complicated to set up, and I wanted to use the stuff I had in my test, like my test suite. I wanted to duplicate that effort. I started playing around with fixtures. They do work. The foreign keys get a bit weird. And I've never seen this used in like a real life project, but it's possible. However, I actually like factories. Like I'm a massive fan of factory bot. And I have stuff like this where it's like I've got reasonably flushed out factories, which is a reasonable representation of like what my app actually would look like, as opposed to maybe something not so there. So I started playing around with doing this, where I would use FactoryBot to create the like my development and preview environments. So I would just run this command like Rails DB reset, and then I'd have something random each time straight out of my factories, and I was like, this is perfect. The really amazing happy side effect of this was I started noticing my tests became easier to write because I was looking at my development environment and it was very similar to what my tests would kind of look like. And then I started getting incentivized to write better factories because I was like looking at them all day in development and in my preview environments. So suddenly I had like way more like this that happy developer like day where it's like, here's my preview environment that looks fantastic. Here's my test environment, which is fully flushed out, like nothing's been forgotten, and off we go to the races. And then there's like Evil Seed. I'm sure we've all worked on projects where they actually had really bad factories from the get-go and nothing would work, and maybe the database architecture was really complicated. Or maybe you just want to look at something in production and you just want to know what that data looks like, but you want to do it in a sensible way. So Evil Martian made this gem called Evil Seed, and what you do is you kind of configure it to say, okay, give me a snapshot of the database. Whether you say, give me this user ID and all their associations, it will just kind of go through and find them, and it will create a SQL dump for you. And you can go through and you can anonymize key fields and do other things like transformations, and it is so good. I'm using this on a project right now where we have about a 6 gigabyte database, something like that. It takes about 20 minutes to run to get the whole database, anonymize it, pull it down. And I was playing around with it in a dev environment, just building an admin panel today, and I was like wall to wall happiness, like straight there. I was like, oh, this looks like production, this feels like production. But then all the values had been somewhat anonymized and were super safe. And I got very excited about this. Unlike maybe a much bigger project, you might like scope your data a bit differently. But I started kind of thinking about the idea if you could use this gem in particular to whenever you have like an error like blast out, you can maybe take a SQL dump of like all the things around that and get some nice debugging tools with it. It's yeah, it got me very excited. So yeah, this gem really cool. Really, really like it. And finally, you've got plain old Ruby objects. So I'm sure we've all come across like relationships in our database where we're like, this doesn't need to be in the database. It's the same in every environment. Why is this in the database? So I came across a few projects like this and I started thinking about actually, does everything need to be in the database and does it need to be an active record like model thingy? And I was kind of like, okay, maybe not, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And I started playing around with this as an idea where I was like, okay, so this pretends kind of that it's an active record model and it's going to like respond to certain commands and it's going to return some data which is going to be consistent. And then when I actually go to use it, it's like, okay, so when I actually touch it and play with it, it feels like a model, but it's never touching the database. It's all local. So my test environment has this, my all the other environments have this. And yeah, this made me really, really happy to do this. And I was able to almost speed up my test suite because I wasn't chatting to the database as much, which was very cool. Cool. And finally, like testing seeds. So something which blew my mind is like tests will break, the seeds will break over time if you don't maintain them. They will go really rubbish. Like you'll try and maintain them and values will change, your database schema will change, and you won't know something is broken until like maybe you bring on a new developer and they're like, oh, I'm having a bad day now because nothing is working. The code you've given me is just not there. So here's like a really funky little hack for you. You can actually test running like the Rails db seed command by just doing this, which is the Rails application.load seed thing. In a lot of my test suites, I chuck in something like this, where it's going to control whether it's being like turned on or not using a environmental variable. And then I just check it runs without an error, and it can add the right amount of models or the unexpected amount of models are made, which is super cool. It catches stuff every now and again where it's like I like where maybe I've made a little minor mistake. My big main tests haven't quite caught it yet because I haven't like done something. But as I've got started on a feature, I pushed up to CI and it's just caught that maybe relationship is wrong or something like this. So this has been really cool. Uh, there we go. Cool. The other really exciting thing is I'm not sure if many people know this, but if you use FactoryBot, you can actually lint your factories. So that will just check they're valid and check they can save if you save your seeds. So this is phenomenally good. This catches stuff all the time. Once you get your factories to all be valid and you just go through and keep them valid, it's going to catch so many like little mistakes. It's like almost like the cheapest test you can write is this one where it's like, hey, this model has this problem. And it's like, ah, wonderful. Thank you, FactoryBot. You're really good. Like I really owe the people at ThoughtBot who wrote that like a proper beer because that was it was a really 10 out of 10 experience using that. So what the good seeds actually look like, because this is also the hard bit, because it's really hard to know what is like what is a good seed, what is bad, what is like how do you know if you're doing it right? So I was playing around with this like this week trying to think, okay, so what are the main ways you know if you're making like good seeds and it's not this you as a developer being just like this is amazing. Like what are the metrics you can play with? So the first thing I kind of came to the conclusion of if a developer is touching production or reaching for data in production, well, that's a sign of a lot of things kind of going wrong, but mainly it's a sign that there's something missing. So there's probably like some good data there where actually you just need to have a better seed data or you need to represent what's in production better in development or in your test stuff, your test environments, which is good. Finally, also, when you run your application in development, are you paginating stuff often? Are you putting enough data in there to like really fill those N+1 pain points? Like quite often, I've worked on applications where like we normally just put in just enough to see it's working, but not enough to like really load test it. And I think it's quite fun the idea that you can just hammer too much data in there, really make a developer feel the pain while developing and stuff, and then they'll remember to add things like indexes to the database because they'll get faster, or remember to do pagination or those other little things. Also, watching how often your developers maybe like miscommit mistakes to the schema RB into version control into a pull request is probably an indicator that they're not resetting their environments that often. So like you should be able to really safely destroy your Rails app and rebuild it every time you change a branch realistically. That's what we should be aiming for. So if you're constantly seeing developers trashing their environments and rebuilding them regularly and it takes a few seconds, it's probably a good sign that you're doing something right with your seeds because everyone's confident. And the real like creme de la creme is this last one where you kind of it requires like working with like product owners and external stakeholders. But if they're using preview environments and they go, yeah, this is a good representation of production. I feel like safe here to play around and click things and check something's working. If those are being built by seeds and the customer is like, yep, this looks great, that's brilliant. That means you're doing a 10 out of 10 job and you're getting some freedom. Cool. So specifically for developers, I think like the big line I've got is like good seeds are in you have good seeds if you can run like bin setup every time you change your branch and you're able to use them in preview environments. And you don't just have to use like factories or plain old Ruby. Like you can use a mix of everything. Like a combination of all these things is going to give you a really, really good developer experience. And if you put some cheap tests in there, like the linter and just checking things run, you'll have a very good time. I was also playing around recently with that evil seed thing where we have a test around dumping the data, making sure it can dump and then restore it all again. And that spotted so many fantastic like little mistakes in our database schema. It was brilliant. Cool. Well, that's it. I've got a little bit of homework. I want you to open a Rails project and try and make the seeds like a little bit better based on the techniques I've just kind of shown you now. And then let me know how it goes, whether you liked it or didn't like it, whether you think that this is all terrible. And yeah, this just send me a tweet. So I'm Mike Rogers. I'm at Mike Rogers here on Twitter if you want to send me a message or mention me. And you can find all the talk content right here. So yeah, that's up to me. Let me stop sharing my screen. Cool.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was awesome. Um, yeah, we have at least 10 minutes for questions. Does anybody have anything for Mike? Anything he can dive into deeper or just um, help out if you're thinking about seeds, anything of that nature?
I have a quick question on the Poro approach that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I love that, but how do you, I guess, differentiate, just testing that flow versus actually, hitting anything that's going to be DB? You're just saying active record, it's tested enough. I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of replacing the stuff which is in active record and just saying, okay, we're just going to make this thing like a plain Ruby object, which has only got like three methods on it. And it's a lot easier just to test those three methods. And it makes a really nice, the end result is you kind of end up with a lot less code and a lot less stuff going on, I think.
Right. See what all the hype is about.
Cool. Emily, I think you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I also had a question about the plain old Ruby objects. Like, is there, or like, could you articulate a particular scenario in which you kind of reach for those poros?
Yeah, so I had a project where they were storing the different language variations of, I think, a certain product in it. So we had like maybe a blog post where it's in like three different languages. They stored the language in the database, but it meant we always had like the n+1 to pull in some language information. So that would be like the first one. I think the other one is like tax rates, I think is the best example, where it's kind of nice to have them in version control as well because they shouldn't change too much and they're probably going to affect your test. That's like the other one. And I'm trying to think of the other thing where I want to say it's like someone was storing some icon information with like names and some other bits where it was kind of nice to have them in the database, but actually like touching the database constantly in every test because these things always needed to be there and they never really changed. It kind of made sense just to pull them down and keep them in version control instead. Um, cool.
I think
Andrew.
Andrew, you were next. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've used gems like Evil Seed before. I haven't seen Evil Seed. I'm definitely gonna check this out. But I've used things like Seed Dump and things like that.
Yeah.
And the problem that I always ran into is like, yes, it dumps all your data, but it doesn't like understand like the way the records need to be added to the database, right? It kind of just goes down in a line. Whereas you need these records before these records, and you have to like kind of manage how they are related. How does Evil C kind of take care of that, or do you still kind of have to like do a little bit of massaging? Because I would love to be in the situation, but it almost seems unattainable if you're in that situation where you're using a production database locally.
Yeah, so Evil Seed does do a little bit of massaging for you to like help you. It will start on your user object or model, and then it will just do the next relationship and the next relationship and the next relationship in little chunks, and that's super good. Though you might want to maybe append like ignore foreign keys at the top of the file while you're restoring it, just to kind of get around it. But it is pretty fantastic. And just to kind of come back to the Pyro one, I really am keen for if you have mostly static data, that could be a really good solution to just avoid hitting the database. Cool. Trace, I think you were next.
Yeah, I had actually never used Evil Seed, so that
Cool.
may answer my question. But when you're in one of these situations where you are, you know, running on production data, and that's like the only way that you can, test locally, let alone run any tests. Like, how have you been able to migrate that, bit by bit to some of what you showed us today? Like, is
Yeah.
there a more
So
incremental refactoring path when you're starting with something
yeah,
giant?
100%. So like it's like I think if you want to make a developer really unhappy at their job, make them like take a massive database and write bits for it really like in one big chunk. They'll never understand what's going on. I think the best step is take evil seed as like your starting point, and then use maybe some of those to make some of your factories as like a with a bit of faker dropped in, and then just keep going down like the pipe until suddenly you've got this wonderful like app which works. And this doesn't have to happen in like one sprint or overnight. Like, you can do this over like a long period of time where like you start feeling the pain of like doing things. So I think on the app I'm currently working on, we use Evil Seed and it makes things really good for seeing lots of data. But we also have like FactoryBot for like when we just need to quickly spin up some stuff to have a look at it, and that nice combination works really well. Um, cool. Thomas, go on.
Yeah, my question was, my question was similar. How do we approach like a large code base that has no factories, and tips for like breaking that up into factories and having it actually match the current functionality? And I saw you mention factory.lint, which I've never seen before. So is lint
Yeah.
good for something like that?
Yes. Okay. So FactoryBot is like my lifesaver every time. The amount of mistakes I've made and it just catches it, and it's just like a very cheap test to have is good. So big applications where they don't have stuff to start with are inherently difficult. Like you have to understand what data needs to be, then you have to make it look vaguely like production anyway. I would totally go from start with like simple basic stuff to get yourself going, and then just keep working your way down, and then just keep building out your seeds as you go. And then you may not build out the entire app really quickly, but as long as you kind of work towards that aim, and then maybe over a long period of time you will have like that happy little developer environment where it's like you can just spin stuff up and down and be really happy, and that's what you can go for. So pretty much Evil Seed is maybe your starting point there. Use that to kind of get an idea of what you could put into factories using stuff like Faker, and then just keep drilling down as you need like more variations and stuff.
Cool, thank you.
No worries. Clay, go on.
Yeah, so I've got a question for you on this one. I think it was a great talk, by the way, and I
Oh, thank
really
you.
appreciate a lot of the things you were saying about setting up your seeders well. One thing that I just want your insight on is like one of the things that this is inevitably sort of leaked in for me in my development is using factories, especially when you're setting up like end-to-end tests. So I always find myself wanting to over-test and kind of come up with these complex scenarios. And what I found when I first started doing that is I would go into all like a certain test file where I'm testing one feature end to end, and I just have factory instantiations, all sorts of permutations of this all littered throughout the code. And then I eventually started thinking, oh well, there is some abstraction here that can be abstracted out into like different environments. And on another app that we're building, I basically landed on this solution of, well, I have sort of like an environment that I want to seed up per unit or per situation here, and test maybe 5 different things for the situation. So just wondering if you have like best practices to extend this and help leverage these things in your test as well.
Oh, so this is a tricky one because best practice is the hardest thing to decide on. So yeah, if you were to make like lots and lots of factories of every permutation, that's going to be very hard to maintain. I think making factories is also kind of a discipline as well, where you're like, if you use a blog post, for example, we might have like the draft blog post and then the published one and then published with comments as like the variations. And then we don't want to go too crazy making too many because that could get like really hard to manage. For like multiple environments and whatnot, I'm not sure. Does anyone else have any thoughts? I'm kind of thinking you'd kind of just make lots of variations and maybe bring some seeds in as you need them, but I'm not sure if anyone else in the
And
room has any thoughts.
and just one clarifying thing as well, like I feel like most of these factory frameworks, I haven't used the Ruby one recently, but most of the factory frameworks, they can allow you to kind of like override specific things based on your situation. So you kind of have like the default factory.
Oh
But
yeah.
I found that I just in all of these tests, I'd have specifics overridden everywhere, where a user didn't do this correctly or this sort of thing. So yeah, I am curious. Anybody
I
else
think
have
that's
any
when
tips on this?
you come into the rule of threes a little bit, where if you've overridden a specific variable 3 times with similar data, maybe make that a trait or a different factory and go
Yeah,
from there.
that's
Like like kind of like how you'd refactor code, just kind of look at it and be strict. I'm curious if anyone else has any thoughts. David, I can see your hand up as well. Do you, you're muted.
All right, can get back to the right tab there. Yeah, thanks. I thought the talk was great. Also, this happens to be just like one of those things that I'm like always particular about. Like nothing that rubbed me more than having like a new engineer onboarding onto a team and then like not having a way to get productive. They're like, well, how does this work? What does it do? What does the data look like when it's right? And so I guess in most of the projects I've been involved in, I've concentrated a fair amount on seeds like you have. Where I work currently, we had a lot of, there was some interesting, like the real answer is to use factories, I think. I know that when you're thrown into a non-greenfield situation, that obviously becomes more difficult. But for me, and I think you mentioned this and other people have, as I'm doing dev testing, I discover the factories I need if I hadn't already discovered them when I'm running a unit test and end-to-end tests, right? In a prior role, we also gave our QA team the ability to log in as any user factory that existed within FactoryBot. Like we created our own gem that that just loaded in the the QA environments and staging, and they could then just log in with users that had all these different scenarios that were set up, so that they didn't have to go through manually. A user that hasn't made an order in 20 days that has these made an order prior to that of whatever permutation you can imagine. It made it really easy for them to work those scenarios. And as far as loading different data in different environments, we've always just written like our own little seeds loader that just loads out of a directory, one per environment. So there'll be a production, well, not production usually, so there'll be a dev, QA, test, and staging environments. And that way, if there's data that's specific to those environments, it can be in those environments and not load in the others. And then we have like one common folder that they all load, and then they load down, load their own specific environment stuff. So that was just a simple type fix to solve the environment thing. We also have SOX problems where, Sarbanes-Oxley regulation that applies to the company I'm at. So we can't touch production data. We can't be passing around blobs of data. And also the data just gets to be too large at some point. It's not even reasonable to do so. And so we wrote our own scripts for our staging environment because we do need full-size data there that anonymizes the data within the AWS environment in a secure VPC. And once that's anonymized on like a cloned server, we then extract that data from that server and move it into an S3 bucket that can be loaded into our staging environment. And if you wanted to load it locally, you could, because it's been completely anonymized. But yeah, so it's a good conversation though. I think it's super important to think about this stuff early on. You do yourself a favor, make it a lot easier to be agile in your development process with good seeds. So it's a great topic. Thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've done like a little bit with having like different seeds for a different environment, but like normally I try and my projects are normally a bit more stricter, but I've never worked on a gigantic enough project to do that. But that would be so cool. But I also like how you touched on like how we need to be really careful about where we are like anonymizing this data and how we're pulling it out, and like actually setting up a server to pull down the data and do the stuff to it, and then safely storing it on an S3 bucket if we need to, as opposed to this passing stuff around, is just generally good practices, which we should be doing, which is really, really good.
Yeah, in general, don't ever download production data.
Eventually
it's going to make you liable.
Yeah, I think the rule of thumb is if you're like logging into like production, maybe you've like it should be the last resort, and maybe there's something horrifically wrong. But
Totally.
Wonderful. Cool. All right. Has anyone else got any other questions or things they want to add? Oh, Robert, go on.
Okay, I'll go ahead since nobody else raised their hand. You got me to go look at my seeds.rb file, and I realized in my world, just an internal app for a company, that file calls a bunch of service objects, and I call and it reads through either YAML files or CSV files to instantiate like the basic data for the app about the company, like what kind of departments are there, things that change maybe occasionally, but are changing enough that I need to put them in a model and not just make them static. And they're also voluminous enough that I don't want to just encode them, hard code them in things. And I'm wondering, I'm looking at that going, well, I don't know if that's an anti-pattern or correct or what, because I don't feel like I use seeds to actually seed any like user data or things like that that would be sensitive. I just use it to set up the data within the app to get things stable to run. And so I feel like either I'm missing it completely or I'm missing part of it, or
No,
I'm okay.
I think what you're doing is totally fine. That's all good.
Okay.
As long as the rule, it's fine. As long as like if you're like building your app and it's working and you're not like having those moments where you're like, I need to go fill in some data from somewhere, you're probably on the right path. I think the only thing I'd probably like think to change there is maybe put that into a Pyro, like a plain old Ruby object if it's not changing too much and it is in version control already, just to avoid touching the database too much. But I think loading it from a YAML file into the database, that's also fine. And
Is there,
having data, sorry.
I'm sorry, is there a heuristic you would use to know when that line is for
I
putting
think
something?
the answer would be to bring a junior dev or a new dev in and see how long it takes them to get started and see if they complain about the data or getting this stuff. That'll be the heuristic you need to use. Like,
Fair enough. Thank you. And great talk. I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Otherwise, yeah, maybe also the other one could be like how long your test suite takes to run as well. The other benefit of Pyros is it makes your tests really quick because you're not pushing stuff into the database and then pulling it back down and then pushing it back in each time you run the test and do any transaction. So definitely that could be another one as well. So cool. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Mike. This was obviously
It's been a
fantastic. This
pleasure.
as many people in comments and everybody who got to ask a question and talk pointed out. I think normally we do a round if anybody's hiring and if anybody's looking for opportunities, please speak up. David, I know we haven't heard from you in a month. You always have some good, I think some good
we're always
positions open.
hiring. Yeah, always hiring here. We're hiring, Ruby on Rails engineers, React and React Native people. So, and if you know how to do more than one of those things, wow, that's great. I'd love to, you won't be stuck doing just one. So yeah, I can share a link to our careers page. But yeah, it's
and David, what's the level of experience? I mean, usually, of course, there's maybe experience is good, but like, what's the level you're looking for?
Yeah, so right now we have postings up for like junior and senior Rails engineers, and then React is more looking for intermediate on the React.js side and senior on React Native. That answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Anybody else on the hiring side? I think I saw Trace, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I work here at RDM with a bunch of people that I worked with when I was a Ruby developer at Pivotal Labs a long time ago and hanging out at NYCRB a lot. And Andrew, I've been getting your emails forever and the timing worked out tonight. Just thought I'd pop in and say hey. RDM is a consultancy kind of in the model of what Pivotal Labs was in the back in the day, but iterating on that a fair bit. And we help our clients, learn how to, do the right thing by learning by doing alongside them and working on projects, hiring teams, a lot of enablement, and working with leadership too. It's interesting how extreme programming has evolved. I'll dig up. I'm not like part of the recruiting team or anything or an engineering manager, but I'll post a link in case anyone's interested.
Please post a link. Yes, please. And great to see you here. Clay?
Yeah, sorry, can you guys hear me? I was shutting everything down and Mike was messaging with me, encouraged me to also talk about our opportunities. So obviously St. Jude, we're hiring St. Jude Children's Research Hospital for those who, aren't around the circles of that. kind of new to the tech scene, but like I said, we're hiring. Specifically, the project that we work on, including Mike and Stephanie here, is a project called the St. Jude Cloud Project. And just briefly, the goal of that project is to take all the cancer genomics data that's generated at St. Jude and share it freely with people around the world. So we're always hiring developers, product owners, things like that. I think, Mike, we have one Ruby position, right? That's open right now. So that's for a kind of an intermediate level Ruby on Rails developer that would be working alongside Mike and Stephanie. So yeah, if you're interested, check it out.
Awesome. Thank you, Clay. Okay. Anybody else on the hiring front? And if not, I'd like to give, if anybody's looking, please, put your profile in the chat or just mention what you're looking for.
Is everyone like redoing their seats file right now? Is that what's happened?
At least 10% from what I remember.
Production data is downloading and the regulators are watching.
Why are you running something called Evil Seed on production data, Trace? That should be the first thing. That should be the first thing, like, the security officer should be like, what's going on? Evil.
Actually, just to say, that was definitely my first thought when I saw Mike doing a pull request with something called Evil Seed. And I was like, what is going on here? But I was pleasantly surprised at what the point was.
Until a dependency takes your Bitcoin.
Oh, let's hope not. Jeez, I don't have any Bitcoin, but let's hope not.
Or even better, it starts using your resources to start mining on your systems.
Yeah, that's a much, much, much more common occurrence, actually. All right, Andrew, do we have any other things we want to cover?
No, that's it. If I guess people want to sit around and chit chat and like maybe work on their seed files more, that'd be cool. Like we can leave the chat open and everyone can just hang out a bit. I know everyone's like, we're 3 or 4 different time zones now, right?
At least. Andrew, did you mention that we have a survey coming?
Yes, I mentioned at the beginning, and
great. Okay.
It better. I think everyone here filled it out, right? Long details, very good feedback. Saying how much you love us, how much you need us. How I was like, hey, where do I throw my Bitcoin?
Is there a link to the survey handy? Yeah, we could do that.
So I have that. Oh, wait. I should stop recording.